Chapter 58 The Boy Who Counts. After playing a few hands, Fan Xian's hand was not very good, plus he was really impatient with Aunt Lu's apparent intimacy, so he gave up his position and patted Fan Xizhe. Fan Xizhe timidly glanced at his father, and Si Nan Bo nodded slightly. He was ecstatic in his heart, and with a soft bark, he jumped onto the stool. This boy was usually always cowering in front of his father, and after eating he would be forced to warm up his books, much less be allowed to play cards and gamble. He knew that he was able to get to the table today because his father was in a good mood and gave Fan Xian face, so Fan Xizhe felt much better about this older brother from Tanyuzu in his heart. Fan Xian went to stroll around the courtyard, and when he returned to the flower hall, he looked at the table with his jaw dropped and realized that Fan Xizhe had copper coins piled up in front of him, while the other three had actually lost almost all of their money. Associated with the daytime and the carriage, this seems to be a little bad brother to show the kind of incomparable enthusiasm for wealth. Fan Xian finally realized that the original brother is not necessarily useless, at least in the aspect of earning money, seems to be very some talent. He curiously stood behind Fan Xizhe, carefully observing how this 12-year-old boy actually operated. After watching for a while, can't help but respect, only to see this kid's hands are extremely flexible, actually can one-hand code cards, grab cards, touch cards, out of the cards, touch cards, eat cards, who cards. The other hand is resting on the abacus, fat 5 fingers plucked abacus beads snapping sound. The who are all fan-seeching who, and the method of counting is very complicated, so counting the money is also fan-seeching in the counting. Fan Xian watched from the sidelines, always feeling that this kid could count more than his money, so it was no wonder that he was able to pile up so many coins in front of him. Realizing that Fan Xian was staring at Fan Xizhe, Lu's face remained unchanged, and she sighed in her heart, thinking that her son's money-grubbing ugliness had been seen by Fan Xian, and she was afraid that the other party's confidence would grow even more. She didn't know the shock in Fan Xian's heart, because Fan Xian couldn't see a trace of brutality or nonsense on Fan Xizhe's face at this time, but only the kind of resolute and serious light that only an idealist could have. Fan Xian concluded in his heart that this young man in front of him, as long as he was given a space to play, he would definitely be able to become a very powerful character in the future. However, he also knew that in the country of Qing, if you want to make a name for yourself, there is still only one way to get a job, even if Fan Xizhe will inherit a title in the future because of his family's relationship. But he really wants to be authorized to a real position. With his current level of books, it's still impossible. No wonder Fuji Zijing said that Lu's son is both hateful and painful. The merchants of this era are still not valued. The ministry of the household is one thing, the royal merchants is one thing, but the private merchants is another thing. The card game soon came to an end. Sinan Bo Fan Jian left his seat without expression. This kind of happy family gathering was not in line with his character, but I don't know why. But today is not quite the same as usual. It was only when he left that he glanced at Fan Xian. Fan Xian read something in his father's gaze, and it seemed that ditching the guards his father had sent him during the day had made him a little unhappy. Fan Xian smiled and didn't respond to anything. After all, he was a man who didn't like being followed, and since that was the case, he might as well make that clear with his actions early on. Lu glanced at her own son, a trace of pity and helplessness showing in her gaze, only for this emotion to pass in an instant. Getting up and saying a word to Fan Xian and Fan Ruo with extreme politeness, she followed her husband and left. The servants of the Sananbo residence all knew that the Lord liked to drink a cup of fruit syrup every night before going to bed, and that it was all handmade by Lu to help the Lord, who labored daily at the Ministry of Households, fall asleep. Fan Xian frowned. He had wanted to talk to his father about something, but it looked like he would have to put it off. Turning back, he saw Fan Xizhe, who was still lying on the table memorizing the number, and asked curiously, "Why don't you collect the money and memorize it?" "Ruoro will play cards for a while, early some tired, gently move a wrist," said with a smile. The annual festival will come to some guests, then father will allow him to play for a while, but every time he won the copper, but not allowed to collect him. Said the man is a big man, how can you greed these small profits? He didn't dare to go against his father's wishes, but every time he did, he would write down how much he had won, saying that he would slowly settle the score with us in the future. Fan Xian's heart stirred, hearing something else in the word accounting. He stabilized his mind and asked with a smile, "Xija, I see that you're good at calculating. I wonder what you're going to do when you grow up in the future." Fan Xija's small age, bookkeeping time is not distracted, very concentrated, heard him ask but not answer. Fan Ruoro thought that her brother didn't know her younger brother's temperament and was afraid that he would be upset, so she was ready to help explain, but when she turned her eyes around, she saw that Fan Xian was all smiles, and looked at the young man at the table who was keeping the books with a little bit of admiration. After finishing his bookkeeping, Fan Xija seemed to have just thought of the question Fan Xian had just asked, and after touching his head and frowning for a while, he said, "Of course it's to study and become an official, to honor the family." Fan Xian looked at him with amusement and asked, "Is that really true?" Fan Xija's anger gave out at once, lying on the table and saying breathlessly, "If I don't say it like this, when my mother hears it, she'll give me another good beating. There's only the three of us here, so what if you just say what you really mean?" Fan Xian joked. This sentence fell into Fan Xija's ears, but let him have some different feelings. He grew up in the awe of the subordinates in the eyes of the general official children. Always father is strict and mother is kind. But his father is strict and mother is also strict, and then his father let his sister discipline, who knows that his sister is even more severe, so the younger brother is not unfamiliar with this kind of feeling. But the older brother and friend has not experienced. At this time, to hear the three words of sincerity, Fan Xija's some trance, seems to be in front of this, then their own 4-year-old brother does not seem to be very scary, unlike what the mother said, on the contrary, but some kind of affection. I like to make money. Businessman seeking profit, what's so good about it?" Fan Ruo frowned and lectured. Fan Xian looked at his sister with extreme disapproval, a little disappointed in his heart, thinking to himself that this girl had corresponded with me for several years. How could she still have such a constricted and eccentric idea? Being glared at by him, Ruo's heart tightened, knowing that she had said the wrong thing, and hurriedly stopped talking. Fan Xian smiled and looked at Fan Xija and said, "Anything, as long as it's done well. Earning money is the same. I support you." "You support has no use." Fan Xija lamented, "You have to let Father Sama open this mouth. Do it secretly." Fan Xian seduced the other party like a devil. Fan Xija's spirit lifted, and then he instantly thought of something and said enthusiastically, "Brother, then first give me the manuscript of that book in stock, and I'll have a way to sell the book for a big price." His shout of "brother" was not forced. Fan Xian was stunned and said, "Isn't it slow to rely on this for money? Are you worried about money?" Fan Xija looked at him with contempt, just trying it out. Realizing that this kid actually dared to despise himself, Fan Xian became furious and droned, "If you want to take the goods, you should give me a plan to look at first."